In the quiet suburbs of Columbus, Ohio, neighbors saw Emily Parker as a woman who had it all. At 28, she drove a new SUV, wore a real estate badge with pride, and came home to a husband who kissed her forehead before mowing the lawn. Friends envied her for more than the spacious two-story house. They envied the ease in her laughter. And at every Sunday dinner, seated across from her mother, Diane, Emily carried the glow of a daughter who trusted the world she was born into. But if her life looked effortless, why would it soon collapse into scandal? Why would her marriage, her family, and even her trust in bloodline ties be torn apart? Those answers hid in the cracks no one was paying attention to. Diane, just 50 and strikingly youthful, lived only 10 minutes away. She was a frequent guest, always stepping in with casseroles or quick errands. At first, it felt like love. Later, it would feel like invasion. And Mark, Emily's husband, a man she had met during their days at Ohio State, seemed like the anchor of her stability. Yet even anchors can rust from the inside out. For now, Emily believed in the dream. But the question hung, invisible. How much of what she cherished was already slipping away? Because soon, she would discover that the people closest to her weren't just hiding secrets, they were hiding entire lives. It started with excuses that seemed harmless. Mark began working late, telling Emily that the housing market was unpredictable, that clients were calling at odd hours. Emily, busy with her own listings, believed him. But soon, the hours stretched longer, the phone calls grew quieter, and his explanations became thinner. At the same time, Diane's presence in their home grew heavier. Once a week turned into 3. She dropped by with groceries, offered to fold laundry, and lingered longer than before. Emily welcomed it at first. After all, her mother had raised her through the chaos of adolescence in Cleveland, and she had always been her safe place. But now, Emily noticed that Diane's timing often lined up with Mark's absences. When Emily came home exhausted from work, she'd sometimes find her husband and mother sitting together in the kitchen, mid-conversation, both falling silent when she walked in. Neighbors began to notice too. One even joked that Diane was around so often, she might as well move in. Emily laughed it off, but inside, something unsettled her. Questions began forming, though she kept them buried. Why was Mark so guarded with his phone lately? Why did Diane always seem to know his schedule better than she did? Emily didn't dare confront either of them, not yet. She told herself she was imagining things, that stress was bending her perception. But in marriages built on trust, it only takes one crack for the whole structure to weaken. And soon, Emily would see her first undeniable fracture. It was a small detail, but once Emily noticed it, she couldn't forget. One evening after a family dinner, Diane leaned in to hug her daughter goodbye. That's when Emily caught it, the faint but unmistakable scent of Mark's cologne clinging to her mother's sweater. The fragrance was sharp, the same bottle Emily had bought for Mark on his birthday last spring. At first, Emily tried to explain it away. Maybe Diane had brushed against Mark while setting the table. Maybe it was nothing. But later that night, as she folded laundry, the thought refused to leave. How close did someone need to be for a scent to cling that strongly? The next week, the signs grew harder to ignore. Diane lingered at the house even when Emily excused herself to take phone calls. Mark seemed more attentive to Diane's stories than to Emily's day. Their laughter sometimes echoed from the kitchen, moments before Emily walked in, leaving her to wonder what joke had been shared at her expense. Emily confided in no one, not her friends, not her colleagues. To say it out loud would make it real, and she wasn't ready to face that. Instead, she kept a careful watch, quiet, deliberate, and uneasy. Every detail mattered now. The way Diane's eyes softened when Mark spoke, the way Mark avoided Emily's gaze when she mentioned future plans. The unease was no longer paranoia. It was evidence building in silence. And soon, Emily would find proof that could never be brushed aside. The discovery came on a rainy Thursday evening. Emily was tidying Mark's truck, clearing out fast food wrappers and receipts, when her hand brushed against the lip of the spare tire compartment. At first, she thought it was a misplaced wallet, but as she pulled it out, her breath caught. A small black flip phone, the kind no one used anymore. Her pulse quickened. Mark had never mentioned a second phone. With trembling hands, she powered it on. The screen lit up instantly, revealing unread messages. Against her better judgment, she opened them. What she saw felt like a blade twisting in her chest. The texts were raw, intimate, impossible to mistake. They weren't vague flirtations. They were declarations of passion, of longing, written with a familiarity that only came from years of closeness. And at the bottom of every message was the same signature. Emily's hand shook so badly, she nearly dropped the phone. She scrolled, desperate for another explanation, but the evidence only deepened. References to nights spent together. Mentions of secrets Emily must never know. The words blurred through her tears, but the meaning was crystal clear. For minutes, she sat frozen inside the truck, rain drumming against the windshield like a cruel metronome, counting down her life before and after this moment. The two people she trusted most were bound together in betrayal. But Emily didn't yet realize the phone was only the first crack. What it would lead her to would be far worse than an affair. The next Sunday dinner felt like walking into a performance. Emily sat at the table, smiling through gritted teeth, watching Mark carve the roast as Diane passed the potatoes. Every laugh, every glance exchanged between them carried a weight she couldn't ignore. Inside, her stomach churned with rage. But Emily stayed silent. She had read enough texts on that burner phone to know confrontation, without proof, would backfire. Mark and Diane would deny everything, turn the suspicion back on her, and she would be left appearing paranoid. So she played along. She asked Diane about her week, laughed at Mark's jokes, and even leaned in for a photo Diane insisted on taking. The picture captured 3 smiling faces, but Emily knew the truth. She was sitting across from co-conspirators. When Diane excused herself to answer a call, Emily noticed how quickly Mark's eyes followed her out of the room. It was subtle, but in that glance, Emily saw confirmation, his concern, his connection, his guilt. The dinner ended like all the others, hugs, dishes stacked, polite goodbyes. But for Emily, something had shifted. She was no longer the unknowing wife. She was a woman carrying dangerous knowledge, trapped between heartbreak and strategy. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was a choice. She would bide her time, gather evidence, and when the moment came, she would decide whether to expose them or destroy them. Emily didn't know it yet, but the next clue would fall into her lap by accident, forcing her to face a truth far worse than she imagined. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Emily had come home early, her head pounding from a long day of negotiations with clients. She stepped quietly inside, not expecting anyone. But from the living room, she heard voices, Mark's and Diane's. They were speaking low, almost whispering, but one sentence froze Emily where she stood. Mark's voice tender, almost pleading. "We just have to be careful until everything's finalized." Emily's pulse thundered in her ears. She held her breath, straining to catch Diane's reply. It was muffled, but the tone was intimate, soft, reassuring, not the voice of a mother talking to her daughter's husband. Before she could hear more, Mark noticed the front door and called out. Emily forced a smile, pretending she had just arrived. Diane stood quickly, smoothing her sweater, her expression carefully neutral. They offered explanations. Diane had stopped by to drop off soup. Mark had been discussing finances. The words tumbled out too fast, too rehearsed. Emily nodded, feigning ignorance, but her mind raced. That single overheard line confirmed it. Something was being planned, something that involved secrecy and careful timing. That night, Emily replayed the moment over and over. Finalized? What were they finalizing? A divorce? A new life together? Something worse? The paranoia she once dismissed now felt like survival instinct. And when she finally decided to follow Mark's late-night drive, what she uncovered would push her deeper into a nightmare she wasn't ready to face. Mark's late nights no longer ended with him slipping quietly into bed. Emily began to notice his car gone well past midnight, his phone silenced, his alibis shaky. One evening, determined to uncover the truth, she followed him, keeping a cautious distance on I-71. Emily's headlights trailed his taillights as he drove south, miles away from their home in Columbus. Her hands gripped the wheel so tightly her knuckles blanched. After nearly 2 hours, Mark exited toward Cincinnati. She stopped at a gas station, careful not to be seen, and watched as Mark continued down a narrow road toward the outskirts of the city. Something about his determination, the way he didn't hesitate, the familiarity of the turns, told her this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment trip. He had done this before. The next day, Emily combed through their shared bank records. That's when she saw it. Large withdrawals, unusual payments, and finally, a closing statement for a house purchased just outside Cincinnati. Her husband hadn't just been driving to another city. He and her mother had bought a property together. Emily's heart pounded as the reality set in. This wasn't just an affair. This was a plan. A new life forming behind her back, funded by her own household's money. The betrayal was no longer hidden in text messages or stolen glances. It was now bricks, mortar, and keys to a home she had never seen. And Emily knew she had to go there herself. On a gray Saturday morning, Emily drove the same road she'd seen Mark take. The directions led her to a quiet cul-de-sac on the edge of Cincinnati. There, nestled among modest ranch-style homes, stood a two-story property with fresh paint and drawn curtains. Her breath caught as she pulled to the curb. Parked in the driveway was a second car she recognized, Diane's. Emily's heart raced as she studied the details. Flowers newly planted by the porch, curtains carefully chosen, a welcome mat that read "Home Sweet Home." It wasn't just a house. It was a life in progress. Through a side window, Emily glimpsed moving boxes stacked against the wall. On the mantelpiece, a framed photo stopped her cold. She couldn't make out every detail from her angle, but what she saw was undeniable. Mark and Diane standing close, smiling, as if they belonged together. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to storm inside, to demand answers. But instead, Emily sat frozen, gripping the steering wheel until her hands ached. Confrontation here, now, could ruin everything. She needed proof, more than a glimpse of photos and cars. She needed to understand what exactly they were building inside those walls. Because the house wasn't just a hideaway. It was evidence. And Emily was determined to uncover what secrets it held, no matter how much it tore her apart. Back in Columbus, Emily tried to move through her days as if nothing had changed. At work, she smiled through client meetings, handed out keys at closings, and posed for photos in front of sold signs. But behind the professional mask, her world was collapsing. Nights were the hardest. Lying beside Mark, she pretended to sleep, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, wondering if he was dreaming of Diane instead of her. Every touch felt staged, every word rehearsed. Her friends noticed a change. Over lunch, one asked if everything was all right. Emily forced a laugh, blaming stress, but her voice cracked under the weight of the lie. She couldn't bring herself to confide in anyone. Who would believe her if she admitted that her husband and her mother were building a secret life together? The weight seeped into her body. Missed meals, restless sleep, dark circles beneath her eyes. She began avoiding calls from Diane, her stomach twisting at the sound of her mother's voice. Yet Emily wasn't broken. The pain sharpened her focus. She replayed every conversation, every detail, searching for threads she had missed. She told herself she wasn't just a victim, she was preparing. Still, one question haunted her in the silence of night. Was this betrayal just about passion, or was there something even colder at play? The answer would arrive soon, in the form of numbers on a bank statement. One evening, unable to rest, Emily opened her laptop and dug deeper into their finances. She had access to Mark's accounts, but what she uncovered made her hands tremble. Withdrawals, large ones, were missing from their savings. Transfers had been routed to accounts she didn't recognize. At first, she thought it was a mistake, but the pattern was too deliberate. Each withdrawal lined up with payments tied to the Cincinnati property. Her breath caught when she traced the money further. Some of it hadn't come from Mark's account. It had come from hers. Loans she never applied for, charges she didn't authorize, all masked with forged signatures. Emily's chest tightened as she pieced it together. This wasn't just an affair. This was theft. Her husband and her mother had stolen from her, drained her accounts, and left her holding debts she never agreed to. The betrayal shifted from personal to criminal. It wasn't about love. It was about replacing her, financially and emotionally, with a new life she was unknowingly funding. For the first time, Emily felt something sharper than heartbreak, fury. They hadn't just broken her trust. They had plotted to erase her, but in their arrogance, they had left a trail. And Emily was ready to follow it, because if Mark and Diane thought they could steal her future, they hadn't yet seen what she was capable of when pushed to the edge. Emily drove back to Cincinnati under the cover of dusk, parking a block away from the house she had once only seen by accident. This time, she came prepared. No unplanned knocks, no emotional outbursts. Only silence, patience, and a notepad she kept on the passenger seat. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where curtains swayed gently in evening breezes, and porch lights flicked on like clockwork. Yet this house, their house, stood apart. Its blinds were always drawn, the driveway always empty. She sat in her car for hours, watching. Her stomach growled, her fingers clenched around a cold cup of coffee, but she refused to leave. And then it happened. At 10:13 p.m., a familiar SUV rolled into the driveway. Mark stepped out first, glancing over his shoulder as if checking for prying eyes. Seconds later, Diane emerged from the passenger side, laughing softly, her hand brushing his arm in a way no mother-in-law ever should. They didn't see her in the dark. Emily's pulse thundered in her ears. There it was, their life together, unfolding right in front of her. She scribbled the time, the vehicle, every detail, as though building a case in real time. But then, as the porch light flicked on and the door opened, she saw something that froze her in place. Boxes. Not moving boxes, but neatly stacked containers labeled with a name. Her name. The next morning, after the SUV had disappeared and the street lay silent again, Emily made her move. She slipped on gloves, pulled a hoodie tight around her face, and walked up the driveway as if she belonged. The lock was surprisingly easy, either careless or confident no one would ever dare to intrude. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust and secrets. She moved carefully through the living room, the faint hum of a refrigerator the only sound. Photographs lined the mantel. Mark and Diane, smiling together, standing in front of landmarks Emily had never visited. Vacations she didn't know existed. Memories stolen from her timeline. Her heart pounded as she reached the boxes she'd seen from the car. One by one, she lifted the lids. Inside were pieces of her life, clothes she hadn't worn in years, letters she had written as a teenager, even framed photos of her as a child. Her past, curated and stored in a house that wasn't hers. And then came the final box. She opened it with shaking hands, only to find documents, life insurance policies, forged bank statements, and even a signed deed with her name crossed out and Diane's written in bold ink. The realization cut deeper than anything before. They weren't just planning to replace her. They were preparing to erase her completely. And as Emily closed the lid, footsteps creaked upstairs. Emily froze. The faint creak of footsteps pressed into her chest like a weight she couldn't shake. Someone was upstairs. Her mind raced. Had Mark returned early? Had Diane doubled back, suspecting she would come? She held her breath, every instinct screaming at her to run, yet her legs refused to move. The floorboards above shifted again, this time slower, deliberate, as if whoever was there already knew she was downstairs. Emily slipped behind the staircase, crouching low, clutching the box of incriminating papers to her chest. Sweat trickled down her temples. The silence was unbearable. Then a shadow stretched across the landing. A voice called out, calm, chillingly familiar. "Emily, we knew you'd find this place eventually." It was Diane. Her mother stood at the top of the stairs, dressed casually as though nothing was wrong, yet her eyes carried a sharpness Emily had never seen before. The mask of the warm, supportive mother was gone. In its place stood a woman unbothered by the web she'd spun. "You've been watching us," Diane continued, stepping down one creaky stair at a time. "You were never supposed to be here, not like this." Emily's heart hammered. For the first time, she realized this wasn't just betrayal. It was a trap, and the trap had just been sprung. Emily's instinct screamed for escape. She clutched the documents tighter and darted for the door, but before her hand touched the knob, another figure blocked the exit. Mark. His face was unreadable, void of the charm he once carried at family gatherings. "You shouldn't have come here," he said coldly. "Now you've seen too much." Her knees nearly buckled as she glanced between them. The two people she once trusted most now stood united, staring at her like prey cornered by hunters. You built a life with him behind my back. Emily's voice cracked, her anger battling the fear clawing at her throat. With my husband? My own mother. Diane's tone was steady, almost cruel in its calmness. We didn't just build a life. We built a future. One you no longer fit into. Mark reached for the box, his hand brushing hers, but Emily yanked it away. I'll take this to the police, she threatened. Everyone will know what you've done. But Mark only smirked. And who will believe you? A desperate wife? A jealous daughter? These papers, they'll say exactly what we want them to say. The room seemed to close in around her. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was calculated, systematic, and terrifyingly complete. And as the couple closed in on her, Emily realized she was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and dangerously close to losing everything, including her life. Emily's pulse thundered in her ears as Mark and Diane edged closer, her back pressed against the wall, the box of documents clutched to her chest like a lifeline. She had no weapon, no allies, only the truth she had uncovered. Give it to me, Emily, Diane demanded, her voice no longer motherly but sharp, commanding. This doesn't concern you anymore. Emily's eyes burned with tears. I was your daughter. He was my husband. How could you both do this to me? For a split second, Diane hesitated, her face twitching with something between guilt and fury. But Mark broke the silence. Because you were never part of the plan. You were an obstacle. The word sliced through Emily like a blade. Every barbecue, every Sunday dinner, every reassuring smile, it had all been a performance. In a desperate surge, Emily hurled the box across the room. Papers scattered like snow, fluttering across the floor. As Mark lunged to grab them, Emily darted past Diane and bolted toward the door. Her mother's hand grazed her arm, nails digging deep, but Emily tore free, slamming into the cool night air. She didn't stop running, not as Mark's shouts echoed behind her, not as Diane's voice shrieked through the darkness. Her car was parked half a block away. If she could make it there, if she could escape with even one piece of proof, she still had a chance. But as she yanked open the driver's side door, her phone buzzed. A block number. With trembling hands, she answered. A male voice spoke, low and deliberate. Emily, you don't know the whole story. The house isn't just theirs. It's mine too. Her breath caught. Another name. Another player. Another secret. The line went dead, leaving Emily with the chilling realization that this nightmare was far from over. Emily's legs trembled as she slammed the car door shut and floored the accelerator. Gravel sprayed behind her as she tore out of the driveway, heart pounding like a war drum. The phone call echoed in her head, but she focused on one thing, getting away alive. By dawn, she was sitting in a police station in downtown Columbus, her scattered documents stuffed into a plastic evidence bag. She laid everything out. The burner phone she had stolen, the property records, the text messages. At first, the officers exchanged skeptical looks, but as the evidence piled up, their expressions shifted. An investigation launched within hours. Diane and Mark were questioned, their carefully constructed lies collapsing under scrutiny. Neighbors came forward, recalling odd visits, unexplained absences. Piece by piece, the facade crumbled. Emily sat in the back of the courtroom weeks later, her hands still trembling, as prosecutors revealed not just the affair, but the financial fraud, the property scheme, and the betrayal that cut deeper than any knife. When the verdict came down, guilty, Emily didn't cry. She only exhaled, as though releasing years of suffocating lies. Yet even in victory, one question haunted her. Who was the man on the phone? If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more deep dives into true crime cases. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay safe.